So kind of describe the difference between like what is the difference between saving and investing? Like why do people actually need to be investing, and why can't they just save their way to retirement? Talk us through what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's one of the truths that you'll hear about investing is you can't save your way to wealth. I think the problem with saving is that there's very little inherent value to the people who are giving you money for you to put your money in with it, right? Like and it's so true. Like with greater risk typically can come greater reward. When you're saving, it's even like if you're in a high yield savings account, right? Like I have my high yield savings account through Vanguard. Another one could be like SoFi, or Capital One has like a great high yield savings account. You're just giving that bank your money for them to then use to do whatever banks do with it, right? A lot of times they'll put it into their own investments and they'll give you a piece of that, right? But there's not a whole lot of risk there, as opposed to if you're putting it into a company, the company can fail, right? Like that's how you see people lose money in the stock market, is they bet on companies that aren't good picks. But the problem is if you're just putting it into a savings account, you're getting on the low end, like next to nothing. And on the high end, I mean, when we were at super high interest rates, it was like 4.5%, you know, and 4.5% of growth over the course of 30, 40 years, you just can't beat what you could get into the stock market if you were looking between 8 and 10%, right? Which I had mentioned it before, the S&P 500. I want to say it's averaged like 10% over the last 20 or 30 years, which you just can't beat that into a savings account. And so if you want to talk about building wealth, it's really what's going to be my best path forward. It's not going to be putting it into a savings account. And if we were to run some math, like you can see the difference between what 3 or 4% gets you versus the difference between what 7, 8, 9% can get you. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of 10, 20, 30 years. In some cases, depending on how much, it could be over $1 million difference, you know?
Oh yeah, for sure. And you can look up the graphs out there, like even pull up the S&P 500 and see how much it's gone up over the years. Now, like you said, I think the average rate of return is between it's like 10 or 11% or something like that. Yeah. But there's going to be some times that it's down, and there's going to be some years that it's really far up. You just have to stay the course and know that there's going to be that average right in there. So people need to understand that. But yeah, that is the way to really gain wealth by not, you can't just do it within a bank account or a savings account. Yeah. You're going to have to invest in those companies. And I think the thing to note here is, I do a lot of, mostly everything I have is in the S&P 500 at this point, just because I'm so young and I'm not retiring anytime soon. So for me though, that feels comfortable because, in those 500 companies, if one starts to fail or do bad, they're going to replace it with another one. You know what I mean? So that's the top 500. So we're all, and we're not doing single stocks. So it's not going to go down completely. And, to say that the stock market might crash and, it's going to go to zero would be absolutely crazy. I think we're running into more issues than that. If that were to happen, that would mean that all companies are worth zero. We would not have an economy as we would know it. So I think that that's a little, unrealistic to think about. But that's where I stand with it. I've sort of just, trust that, S&P 500 is kind of where I like to go, but I don't know. What about you, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, what you had said that with the S&P 500, if one company starts to do bad, and even like we're talking, there is tens of thousands of companies in the US. And so for one company to do slightly worse doesn't mean it's necessarily doing bad. It's just other companies might start to do better, but they will automatically rotate out those companies every so often so that the top 500 companies are inside of that fund and you're investing in the top companies. And a recent event that happened, that you might have, Lauren, you might have seen this online where like that, I think it was like a Coldplay concert, that CEO.
Oh my God.
Did you see that? Yeah. He got caught like cheating with his HR manager or having an affair or something. And he was on like the kiss cam or whatever. And he just like ducked out. I'm like, those are types of events that can happen to where if you're betting on a single company or even a group of single companies, right? You pick your 10 favorite single companies. Things like that are what could cause the stock to dive, or someone, they release a report that is a little bit less than favorable, and that causes the stock to dive. Like you are putting so much faith in just a handful of people who are controlling a company, as opposed to if you are in the S&P 500 or you're in the total stock market index fund, we're talking between hundreds and thousands of companies, which then, you can kind of expand that hundreds, tens of thousands of people who are supporting the growth of those companies, so it's just looking at it from that point of view. But yeah, I'm the same way as well. Like I said, 90+% of my investments are in the S&P 500. I do have like a couple individual stocks that I had picked when I was like first starting to invest. And let me tell you, most of the individual stocks I picked when I first started did bad, and I sold those a long time ago. There was like maybe like 2 out of those 10 that I had picked when I first started that did, well enough that I ended up keeping them. And I still don't really invest in them anymore. I'm holding on to them because I'm hoping that they'll continue to do better. But that's a risk you have to play if you don't want to pick a fund that's going to track several companies at once.
Yeah. So it's not that scary. We don't have to be doing individual stocks. You can do a bunch of different companies at once. And honestly, it's super easy to get into like an S&P 500 fund. If you have like your Roth IRA, your IRA, whatever, through like, Fidelity, Vanguard, or wherever you have it, it's super easy to just Google what is the S&P 500 fund here. And then you can go invest your money in that. Super easy. The information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.